Commander Jake Morrison stood in the control room of the Deep Space Station Vigilance watching the stars through the large window when the message arrived that would change everything for humanity. The communication officer turned to him with fear in her eyes and said that they had received a transmission from the Zephyrian Collective. Jake felt his heart sink because everyone in the galaxy knew what that meant. The message played on the main screen and showed a tall alien creature with blue skin and glowing red eyes. Supreme Architect Vexathara spoke in perfect English, which made the threat even more terrifying. The aliens said that humanity had grown too fast and spread too far across the galaxy in just 200 years since they learned to travel faster than light. The collective had watched humans build colonies on hundreds of worlds and decided that this expansion was dangerous to galactic peace. Vexathara continued speaking with a voice that sounded like metal scraping against stone. The Zephyrian Collective represented 12 powerful alien species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had brought order and stability to countless worlds and would not allow humans to disturb that peace. The ultimatum was simple and brutal. Humanity had exactly 72 hours to surrender all their colonies and submit to collective rule or face complete extinction. Jake immediately sent the message to Earth using the fastest communication method available. On Earth, President Lisa Carter received the transmission while she was having breakfast with her family. She watched the alien deliver the ultimatum and felt the weight of an entire species fall on her shoulders. Within 1 hour, she had called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Defense Council. Admiral Kevin Brooks arrived at the meeting first and brought with him the most terrifying news possible. Long-range sensors had detected a massive armada approaching human space. The fleet contained over 50,000 ships representing the combined military might of 12 different alien species. Each ship was larger and more advanced than anything humans had ever built. The entire human space fleet numbered only 8,000 vessels, and most of those were exploration ships or cargo haulers converted for military use. Dr. Elena Rodriguez joined the meeting through video link from her research station on Europa. She had spent years studying alien civilizations and brought disturbing news about the collective. 3 other species had received similar ultimatums in the past century. The Harani had surrendered immediately and been absorbed into the collective. The Veltar had fought briefly before surrendering. The mysterious Kithara had simply vanished from all galactic records after refusing to surrender. None of these species existed anymore as independent civilizations. President Carter asked Dr. Rodriguez what she thought would happen if humanity surrendered. The scientist hesitated before answering that she did not think the collective would allow humans to survive as an independent people. The aliens viewed humanity as too unpredictable and too aggressive to be trusted with freedom. Surrender would likely mean the end of human civilization, even if some individual humans were allowed to live as servants or slaves. Admiral Brooks confirmed that evacuation of the outer colonies was impossible. There were not enough transport, ships, and not enough time to move the millions of humans living on frontier worlds. Even if they started immediately, they could only save a small fraction of the colonists. The rest would be trapped when the collective arrived to claim human space. The debate continued for hours as Earth's leaders struggled with an impossible choice. Some argued for surrender, believing that some survival was better than none. Others demanded that humanity fight regardless of the odds because freedom was worth dying for. President Carter listened to every opinion and weighed every option. Captain Ryan Murphy called in from the battleship New Horizon with more bad news. Scout ships had confirmed that the collective fleet was moving faster than expected. They would reach the outer human colonies in 60 hours instead of 72. Time was running out even faster than they had feared as night fell on Earth. President Carter stood alone in her office, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, 50,000 alien warships were coming to destroy everything humanity had built among those stars. She thought about the children playing in the parks of New Angeles Colony and the farmers working the fields of Haven Prime. She thought about the miners on the asteroid stations and the scientists on the research outposts. The president called Admiral Brooks and gave him the order that would decide humanity's fate. Earth would not surrender to the collective. Instead, the entire human fleet would gather at Kepler Junction and make their stand there. It was a star system that controlled access to the inner human colonies, including Earth itself. If humanity was going to die, they would die fighting for their freedom. Admiral Brooks accepted the order without question, even though he knew it was probably a suicide mission. He immediately began sending orders to every human ship in the galaxy. They would concentrate their forces at Kepler Junction and prepare for the largest space battle in human history. President Carter made one final call to her family before addressing the human race. She told her husband and children that she loved them and that everything she was about to do was for their future. Then she walked to the communication center and prepared to tell 8 billion humans that their species was about to go to war against impossible odds. The transmission went out to every human world and station across the galaxy. President Carter stood before the camera and told her people the truth about what was coming. She explained the ultimatum and the choice humanity faced. Then she told them that Earth had chosen to fight rather than surrender because some things were worth dying for, and freedom was one of them. Across human space, people stopped what they were doing to listen to their president. Families gathered around screens in their homes, while workers crowded into break rooms and soldiers assembled in briefing halls. Everyone understood that the next few days would determine whether humanity would continue to exist as a free species or disappear into the darkness of space forever. Admiral Kevin Brooks had never faced a challenge like this in his 30 years of military service. Every human warship in the galaxy was racing toward Kepler Junction, while enemy scouts reported that the collective armada was only 50 hours away. He activated Protocol Defiance, which was a defense plan that had never been tested because nobody thought humanity would ever face such overwhelming odds. Captain Amy Stone received orders to abandon her research mission and report to Kepler Junction immediately. Her science vessel Discovery had been exploring ancient ruins on a dead world at the edge of human space when the crisis began. She gathered her team of researchers and prepared to leave, but something about the ruins bothered her. The stone carvings looked familiar, even though they were thousands of years old. Dr. Stone decided to spend one more hour investigating the site before departing. Her team used advanced scanners to map the underground chambers, and what they found changed everything. The ruins belonged to an ancient civilization that had fought the Zephyrian Collective long ago. Hidden chambers contained fragments of technology and star maps that showed the Collective had destroyed dozens of species over the past 10,000 years. The most important discovery was a series of data crystals that contained information about something called the Architects. These beings had apparently been the galaxy's dominant civilization before the Collective rose to power. The crystals suggested that Architect technology was far more advanced than anything the Collective possessed, but the Architects had mysteriously vanished 50,000 years ago. Captain Stone loaded the crystals onto her ship and raced toward Kepler Junction while her team analyzed the data. What they learned was both exciting and terrifying. The Architect technology was still functional, and some of it might be compatible with human systems. The bad news was that the Collective had been using captured Architect technology to maintain their dominance for millennia. Meanwhile, Colonel Matt Johnson arrived at Kepler Junction aboard a fleet of construction ships and mining vessels. His job was to build defensive positions around the star system using every piece of equipment humanity could spare. Thousands of workers began assembling what they called the Iron Wall, which was a network of armed platforms and hidden weapon systems. The construction project was unlike anything humans had ever attempted. Mining robots designed to break apart asteroids were converted into mobile weapons platforms. Construction drones meant for building space stations became automated defenders. Cargo haulers were stripped down and packed with explosives to serve as suicide ships if necessary. Colonel Johnson worked with engineers who had never designed military equipment before. Civilian contractors found themselves building weapons of war while their families evacuated to safer systems. Nobody complained because everyone understood that this was humanity's last chance to remain free ambassador. Julia Davis spent every waking hour trying to contact other alien species for help. She sent messages to governments across the galaxy, explaining that the collective threatened everyone's freedom, not just humanity's. Most species ignored her messages because they were too afraid of Zephyrian retaliation. Others had already been absorbed into the collective, or were too weak to make any difference. The few responses Julia received were disappointing. The Centauri Republic wished humanity good luck, but could not risk their own destruction. The Vegan Confederacy offered to accept human refugees, but would not provide military assistance. Even species that hated the collective were unwilling to fight alongside humans because the odds were too hopeless. Lieutenant Commander Nick Stevens studied the tactical situation from his position aboard the command ship New Earth. He had been a mining engineer before joining the military and understood how to move large amounts of material through space efficiently. As he looked at the defensive plans, he realized that humanity was thinking about the battle in the wrong way. Traditional space combat involved fleets of warships fighting each other with energy weapons and missiles. The side with more ships and better technology usually won these battles, but humanity did not have more ships or better technology, so they needed to change how space combat worked entirely. Nick proposed using the asteroid belt around Kepler Junction as a weapon itself. Human mining equipment could move asteroids and change their orbits. Construction robots could attach engines and guidance systems to chunks of rock. If they worked fast enough, they could turn the entire star system into a massive weapons platform admiral. Brooks listened to Nick's plan and realized it might be their only hope. Traditional naval tactics would lead to certain defeat, but humanity had advantages that no other species possessed. They were the galaxy's best miners and builders. They could modify equipment faster than anyone else, and they were willing to try ideas that other species would consider insane. The work continued around the clock as thousands of humans prepared for the battle of their lives. Families said goodbye through video messages, while soldiers checked their weapons one final time. Civilian volunteers worked alongside military personnel to build defenses that had never been tested in combat. Captain Pete Williams arrived at Kepler Junction aboard the cruiser Defiance, leading a convoy of evacuation ships. His job was to protect the civilian transports as they carried refugees away from the battle zone. The ships were packed with children and elderly people who could not fight, but needed to survive to rebuild humanity if the worst happened. The evacuation ships represented humanity's future, and Captain Williams knew that protecting them was more important than winning the battle. Even if the human fleet was destroyed, these refugees could start new colonies in distant parts of the galaxy. Humanity would survive even if their current civilization did not. As the hours passed, more human ships arrived at Kepler Junction. Each vessel brought crews who had volunteered to fight against impossible odds. Some ships were military vessels with trained soldiers, but many were civilian craft whose crews had never seen combat. Cargo haulers flew alongside battleships, while passenger liners carried extra ammunition and supplies. The final preparations included setting up communication networks and supply lines. Human engineers worked to ensure that every ship could coordinate with every other ship during the battle. They also established backup command centers in case the primary fleet commanders were killed or captured. Dr. Stone's research team made another breakthrough when they successfully integrated a small piece of architect technology into a human weapon system. The ancient alien device increased the power output by 300% and seemed to adapt automatically to human technology. If they could find more architect artifacts, they might have a chance against collective shields and armor admiral. Brooks received the final status reports as the enemy fleet approached the edge of the star system. The Iron Wall was complete with over 2,000 defensive platforms hidden throughout the asteroid belt. Every human ship was in position and ready for battle. The evacuation convoys were moving towards safe jump points at the edge of the system long. Range sensors detected the collective armada as it dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge. The alien fleet was even larger than intelligence estimates had suggested. Over 60,000 ships of various sizes filled space like a metal storm cloud. Each ship was larger and more powerful than the biggest human vessel Supreme Architect. Vexithara transmitted one final message to the human fleet. The alien leader offered humanity one last chance to surrender and submit to collective rule. The transmission showed thousands of alien warships stretching as far as sensors could detect. The message was clear even without words. Surrender, or die. Admiral Brooks stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy. He thought about his children who were among the refugees fleeing the system. He thought about the billions of humans across the galaxy who were counting on this fleet to protect their freedom. Then he opened a communication channel to respond to the collective ultimatum. The Admiral's response was broadcast across both fleets and would be remembered throughout galactic history. He looked directly into the camera and spoke 3 words that would define humanity's character forever. Come and take it. The collective armada moved through space like a wall of death approaching Kepler Junction. Supreme Architect Vexithara commanded the massive fleet from her flagship Eternal Dominion, which was larger than most human space stations. When Admiral Brooks refused to surrender, the alien leader gave the order that would begin the largest space battle in galactic history. The first wave of collective ships consisted of fast attack vessels designed to break through defensive lines. These ships fired energy beams that could cut through human armor like paper and vaporize smaller vessels completely. The aliens expected to sweep aside human resistance in the first few minutes of combat, just as they had done to countless other species. Captain Pete Williams positioned his cruiser Defiance between the approaching enemy and the evacuation ships carrying human refugees. He knew his ship could not survive long against collective firepower, but every minute he could delay them meant more civilians would escape. His crew volunteered to stay at their posts, even though they understood this was a suicide mission. The battle began when collective scouts encountered the outer edge of humanity's defensive network. Hidden weapons platforms that looked like ordinary asteroids suddenly activated and fired missiles at the alien ships. The scouts were destroyed before they could report what they had found, but the element of surprise would not last long. Vexithara studied the tactical reports and realized that humans were fighting differently than any species the collective had faced before. Instead of meeting the alien fleet with organized battle formations, the humans seemed to be hiding weapons throughout the asteroid belt. Traditional tactics called for destroying the enemy fleet first and then dealing with fixed defenses. Colonel Johnson watched from his command bunker as the first phase of his defensive plan activated. Thousands of automated systems came online simultaneously as mining robots and construction drones transformed into weapons of war. Asteroids that had been fitted with engines began moving toward the collective fleet while cargo containers released. Clouds of metal fragments designed to damage enemy sensors. The aliens advanced through the asteroid field expecting to find the main human fleet waiting for them, but instead, they encountered something completely unexpected. The asteroids themselves were fighting back as mining charges detonated near enemy ships and construction equipment rammed into alien hulls. It was like fighting an entire star system that had come alive. Lieutenant Commander Nick Stevens coordinated the unconventional battle from his position aboard the command ship. His mining experience allowed him to predict how objects would move through space and where the best ambush points would be located. Human forces used the asteroid belt like familiar terrain, while the aliens struggled to adapt to 3-dimensional guerrilla warfare. Captain Stone's research team had worked frantically to integrate more architect technology into human weapons systems. The ancient alien devices seemed to understand what humans were trying to accomplish and adapted their functions accordingly. Human ships that had been upgraded with architect technology could actually penetrate collective shields and cause real damage. The first major engagement occurred when Captain Williams led his small squadron against a formation of collective heavy cruisers. The human ships were outnumbered 10-1, but they fought with desperate courage, knowing that every alien ship they destroyed was one less threat to the evacuation convoys. The Defiance took heavy damage, but managed to destroy 3 enemy vessels before being overwhelmed. Williams died at his post as collective energy beams tore through his ship's bridge, but his sacrifice allowed the civilian transports to reach the edge of the system. Thousands of human refugees escaped because brave soldiers were willing to die for people they had never met. The evacuation ships jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's future to safety. The battle intensified as more collective ships entered the asteroid field and encountered humanity's main defensive line. Admiral Brooks had positioned his fleet among the densest concentration of asteroids where human mining equipment could provide the most support. Every human ship was supported by dozens of automated systems that confused enemy targeting and provided additional firepower. Vexthera grew frustrated as her superior forces failed to achieve the quick victory she had expected. Human resistance was fiercer than anything the collective had encountered in recent memory, and their tactics made no sense according to traditional military doctrine. The aliens were accustomed to fighting enemies who followed accepted rules of galactic warfare. The Supreme Architect decided to deploy heavier ships equipped with weapons designed to destroy fortified positions. These vessels fired particle beams that could cut through asteroids and vaporize anything hiding behind them. The human defensive positions began taking severe casualties as collective firepower overwhelmed their improvised fortifications. Commander Claire Foster led a squadron of human fighters in a desperate attack on the collective command ship, hoping to disrupt enemy coordination. Her small ships darted between massive alien vessels while dodging energy beams and missile attacks. The fighter squadron managed to reach the Eternal Dominion, but were destroyed by defensive weapons before they could cause significant damage. Foster's death inspired other human pilots to attempt increasingly dangerous attacks against impossible odds. They flew their ships into enemy formations and detonated their reactors to damage alien vessels. Some pilots rammed their fighters into collective ships after their weapons ran out of ammunition. Every act of sacrifice weakened the enemy fleet slightly. The tide of battle began to turn against humanity as collective reinforcements arrived from hyperspace. Fresh alien ships replaced those that had been damaged or destroyed, while human forces had no reserves to call upon. Admiral Brooks realized that his fleet was slowly being ground down despite their tactical advantages. Dr. Stone made another breakthrough when her team discovered how to use architect technology to disrupt collective communications. The ancient devices could interfere with alien command systems and prevent coordinated attacks. Human ships equipped with this technology became priority targets as the aliens realized the threat they represented. The battle reached its climax when collective heavy assault ships began systematically destroying human defensive platforms. These massive vessels were too well protected for human weapons to damage significantly, and their firepower could eliminate entire asteroid bases with single shots. The iron wall that had taken so long to build was crumbling under sustained bombardment. Nick Stevens proposed a desperate strategy that required using the asteroid belt's gravitational fields to slingshot large rocks toward the enemy fleet at incredible speeds. Mining equipment designed to move asteroids could launch them like enormous bullets if the calculations were done correctly. The plan was dangerous because miscalculations could damage human ships as well. The asteroid bombardment achieved some success as chunks of rock traveling at tremendous velocity punched through collective shields and armor. Several alien ships were destroyed or disabled by the improvised artillery, but the technique required precise timing and could only be used when enemy ships were in specific positions. As the battle continued, human casualties mounted steadily while collective losses were quickly replaced by fresh ships. Admiral Brooks faced the terrible reality that his fleet could not win a conventional engagement against such overwhelming odds. Traditional space combat favored the side with superior numbers and technology, which meant the aliens would eventually triumph. Supreme Architect Vexthera had grown tired of human resistance and decided to end the battle decisively. She ordered the deployment of the collective's ultimate weapons, which were massive ships designed to destroy entire planets. These vessels were so large they could be seen clearly from Kepler Prime, the inhabited world in the system. The planet-killer ships began charging their main weapons, which could crack worlds apart and eliminate all life on their surface. Vexathera, intended to demonstrate collective power by destroying not just the human fleet, but also the civilian population on Kepler Prime. The message would be clear to any other species, considering Resistance Admiral Brooks watched the enormous ships, preparing to fire, and realized that humanity faced a choice between two kinds of death. They could continue fighting and watch their people be slaughtered, or they could retreat and abandon millions of civilians to alien genocide. Either option meant the effective end of human civilization as they knew it. The darkest hour had arrived for humanity, as their brave stand at Kepler Junction appeared to have failed. Collective forces controlled most of the star system, while planet-killer weapons prepared to eliminate human worlds. It seemed that Vexathera's prediction about human extinction was about to come true despite everything the defenders had sacrificed. The arrival of 5 planet-killer ships marked the darkest moment in human history. Each vessel was the size of a small moon and carried weapons capable of cracking worlds apart like eggs. Supreme Architect Vexathera had decided that destroying human planets would send a message to the entire galaxy about the price of defying the collective. Admiral Brooks faced an impossible decision as the massive ships moved into position around Kepler Prime, where 50 million humans lived and worked. He could order his remaining fleet to attack the planet killers, but that would leave the military installations undefended. He could focus on protecting the military targets, but that meant abandoning civilians to certain death. Captain Dan Miller volunteered to lead a suicide mission against the planet killer ships with every vessel that could be spared from the main battle. His battleship Retribution had already taken heavy damage, but could still fight alongside the other ships willing to sacrifice themselves. Miller knew the odds were hopeless, but someone had to try. The assault force consisted of 23 ships ranging from battleships to converted cargo haulers. Every crew member understood they were flying to their deaths, but nobody hesitated when Miller gave the order to attack. They accelerated toward the planet killers, while collective escort ships moved to intercept them. On the surface of Kepler Prime, Major Susan Clark coordinated the evacuation of the planet's entire population. Transport ships that had been used for moving cargo were hastily converted to carry people, while every available aircraft worked to move civilians from cities to spaceports. The evacuation was supposed to take weeks, but they had only hours. Miller's task force engaged the collective escorts in a desperate running battle toward the planet killers. Human ships fought with suicidal courage as they carved a path through enemy formations. The Retribution lost half her crew when alien energy beams penetrated her hull, but Miller kept his ship moving toward the target. Dr. Rodriguez worked frantically in her laboratory, analyzing captured collective technology for any weakness that could be exploited. Her research team had been studying alien equipment for months, but time was running out to find something useful. She discovered that the collective was not as unified as they appeared, and several member species seemed to fear their Zephyrian masters. The first breakthrough came when Rodriguez found evidence that 3 species within the collective had been conquered rather than joining voluntarily. The Cathari had been absorbed 2,000 years ago and still maintained some independence. The Yelani had joined only 500 years ago and might be persuaded to switch sides. The Tok'ran were recent additions who had surrendered rather than fight. More importantly, Rodriguez discovered that collective technology had not advanced significantly in thousands of years. The aliens relied on standardized equipment and tactics that had worked against previous enemies but made them vulnerable to truly innovative approaches. Humanity's rapid technological development was something the collective had never encountered. Captain Miller's assault reached the first planet killer just as its main weapon began charging. The massive ship was protected by shields that could deflect normal weapons, but the humans attacked with everything they had, including ramming attacks with ships whose weapons had been destroyed. The Retribution managed to penetrate the alien defenses and detonate her reactor core inside the enemy vessel. The explosion of the first planet killer created a chain reaction that destroyed a second one and damaged a third. Miller's sacrifice saved millions of lives on Kepler Prime and the colonies of New Texas and Haven Prime. But 3 planet killers remained operational, and their weapons were almost ready to fire. Major Clark's evacuation efforts managed to save 15 million people, but 35 million remained trapped on Kepler Prime when the planet killers finished charging their weapons. Transport ships continued loading refugees, even as alien weapons prepared to turn their world into burning rubble. Some pilots refused to leave without full loads, despite orders to evacuate immediately. The third planet killer fired its main weapon at Kepler Prime, but something unexpected happened. The beam struck an architect artifact that Dr. Stone's team had discovered buried beneath the planet's surface. Instead of destroying the world, the alien weapon was absorbed and redirected back at the attacking ship. The planet killer was destroyed by its own weapon in a flash of incredible energy. Admiral Brooks realized that architect technology was the key to survival, but humanity had found only small fragments of the ancient alien devices. Somewhere in the galaxy, there had to be larger installations that could turn the tide of battle, but finding them would require time that humanity did not. Have Lieutenant Commander Stevens proposed the unthinkable solution to their desperate situation. Instead of trying to hold fixed positions, humanity should abandon conventional tactics entirely and become a nomadic fighting force. Human ships were designed for long-range exploration and could survive in deep space indefinitely, while collective forces were dependent on supply bases. The plan meant abandoning Kepler Junction and all the colonies they had been trying to protect, but it might be the only way to continue fighting. Human ships could strike at collective supply lines and retreat before reinforcements arrived. They could rescue populations from conquered worlds and establish hidden bases in unexplored regions. Admiral Brooks struggled with the decision because retreating felt like abandoning their duty to protect human civilians. However, staying to fight. A conventional battle would result in the complete destruction of the human fleet and leave Earth defenseless. Sometimes the best way to protect people was to preserve the forces needed to eventually liberate them. The collective bombardment intensified as more alien ships entered the system and began destroying human defensive positions. Vexathera had grown impatient with the unexpectedly fierce resistance and ordered her forces to eliminate all human presence in the system within 6 hours. The Supreme Architect wanted to move on to attacking Earth itself. Dr. Stone made one final discovery that changed everything when she found a complete architect data core hidden in the ruins of an ancient space station. The device contained maps showing the locations of hidden architect facilities throughout the galaxy. More importantly, it revealed that the collective had been built on the ruins of architect civilization. The ancient aliens had not been destroyed by war, but had voluntarily retreated to hidden sanctuaries when they realized their technology was being used to oppress other species. The architects had been waiting for 50,000 years for a species that could use their gifts wisely and restore balance to the galaxy. Admiral Brooks made the hardest decision of his career when he ordered the human fleet to retreat from Kepler Junction. The surviving ships would scatter across the galaxy and begin a new kind of warfare that the collective had never faced. Humanity would become nomads of space fighting for freedom wherever they could find it. The evacuation of Kepler Junction was completed just as collective forces overran the last defensive positions. Human ships disappeared into hyperspace carrying refugees and wounded soldiers, while the aliens claimed control of the star system. To outside observers, it appeared that humanity's resistance had been crushed. Supreme Architect Vexathera celebrated what she believed was a decisive victory over human defiance. The destruction of their main fleet and the capture of their most important colony would surely convince other species that resistance was futile. the collective's dominance seemed more secure than ever. However, the aliens had not achieved the quick, decisive victory they expected. Human resistance had cost them thousands of ships and revealed weaknesses in their seemingly invincible fleet. More importantly, humanity had not surrendered despite suffering devastating losses. The war was far from over. In hidden bases throughout human space, civilian leaders began implementing contingency plans that had been prepared for this exact situation. Resistance networks activated while underground factories started producing weapons and supplies for the scattered fleet. Humanity's war for survival was entering a new and more dangerous phase. The retreat from Kepler Junction marked the end of humanity's conventional military resistance, but it was actually the beginning of something the galaxy had never seen before. Human ingenuity and determination would transform them from a defeated species into something far more dangerous than the collective could imagine. 6 months later, the galaxy would discover that humanity's apparent defeat had actually been the first step toward the greatest rebellion in galactic history. The species that refused to surrender would teach the universe that some fights are worth continuing no matter how hopeless they appear. 6 months after the fall of Kepler Junction, the galaxy had changed in ways that nobody expected. Supreme Architect Vexithara had declared victory over humanity and moved on to threaten other species, but the humans had not disappeared as planned. Instead, they had transformed into something the collective had never encountered before. Captain Alex Taylor commanded one of 50 small human battle groups that now roamed the galaxy like wolves hunting in the darkness. His ships were a mix of captured collective vessels and modified human craft that looked like ordinary cargo haulers, but carried enough firepower to destroy military targets. The group had learned to live entirely in space, using their ships as mobile homes. Taylor's group specialized in attacking collective supply convoys that carried food and equipment to alien military bases. They would emerge from hyperspace without warning and destroy the escort ships before the convoy could call for help. After capturing the supplies they needed, the humans would vanish back into the void, leaving no trace of their presence. The collective had expected humanity to either surrender after losing their main fleet or retreat to Earth and wait for the final attack. Instead, human forces had scattered across the galaxy and begun a guerrilla campaign that struck without warning at targets throughout collective space. No alien supply line was safe, and no military base was secure. Admiral Brooks commanded the nomadic human fleet from his flagship New Earth, which had been converted from a massive colony transport ship. The vessel served as a mobile headquarters and supply base for dozens of smaller combat groups. Human families lived aboard the ship alongside soldiers and technicians in a community that existed only in the depths of space. The Admiral had transformed humanity's military doctrine completely. Instead of trying to hold territory, the human fleet moved constantly and struck at targets of opportunity. They rescued enslaved populations from collective worlds and recruited new allies from species that had been conquered by the aliens. The human fleet grew larger with each successful operation. Dr. Rodriguez had been proven correct about divisions within the collective when 3 member species began questioning their alliance with the Zephyrians. The Cathari had secretly provided information about collective fleet movements to human agents. The Yilani had refused to participate in attacks on civilian targets. The Tok'ran had withdrawn their ships from active duty, claiming they needed to defend their homeworld. Captain Stone continued her research into architect technology from her laboratory aboard a converted science vessel. Her team had discovered that the ancient aliens had left behind a network of hidden facilities designed to eventually restore balance to the galaxy. The architects had been waiting for a species with the right combination of technology and moral courage. The most important discovery was that architect technology could interface directly with human equipment in ways that seemed almost magical. Ancient alien devices would adapt their functions to match human intentions and provide capabilities that went far beyond their original design. It was as if the architects had built their technology specifically for humanity to find human forces. made contact with other species that had been secretly resisting collective expansion. The hegemony of free worlds was a small alliance led by the crystalline Vortians and the cybernetic Nexus that had been hiding in the galactic rim for centuries. These species had advanced technology, but lacked the numbers to challenge the collective directly. Lieutenant Commander Stevens had been promoted to full commander and now led combined human-alien operations against collective targets. His first joint mission involved attacking a fortress world where the aliens held political prisoners from dozens of conquered species. The operation required precise coordination between human tactics and alien technology. The assault on Prison World Gamma-7 demonstrated that humanity's innovative approach to warfare could work on a larger scale when combined with alien resources. Human forces provided the tactical flexibility, while Vortian ships contributed advanced weapons, and Nexus cybernetic systems disrupted enemy communications. The mission freed over 1 million prisoners. Stevens discovered that other species had been waiting for someone to show them that the collective could be defeated. Human resistance had inspired rebellions throughout the galaxy as conquered populations realized that their oppressors were not invincible. The galaxy was beginning to rise up against 10,000 years of alien tyranny. The hegemony of free worlds grew rapidly as more species joined the rebellion against collective rule. The alliance now included over 30 different civilizations, ranging from advanced spacefaring races to primitive worlds that contributed raw materials and volunteers. Each species brought unique capabilities that strengthened the overall resistance. Captain Taylor's battle group made another significant discovery when they captured a collective data archive containing information about the aliens' true center of power. The Zephyrian homeworld was not the real headquarters of their empire, but merely a regional capital. The actual command center was something called the Nexus of Eternity, hidden in the galactic core. Dr. Stone analyzed the captured data and realized that the Nexus of Eternity was actually an ancient architect facility that the collective had been using to coordinate their vast empire. The station contained technology that allowed the aliens to communicate instantly across the galaxy and control their member species through a combination of fear and electronic surveillance. The discovery explained how the collective maintained control over such a vast territory with relatively few ships. The Nexus served as both a command center and a prison that kept member species from rebelling. Destroying the station would cripple the aliens' ability to coordinate their forces and might cause their empire to collapse. Admiral Brooks began planning the most ambitious operation in human history. The combined rebel fleet would have to travel to the galactic core and penetrate defenses that had protected the Nexus for thousands of years. The journey alone would take months and would expose the fleet to attacks from collective forces throughout their territory. The rebellion had grown beyond anything the humans had imagined possible. What started as humanity's desperate fight for survival had become the largest galactic uprising in 50,000 years. Over 100,000 ships from dozens of species were now united under human leadership in the fight against collective tyranny. Supreme Architect Vexathera finally understood the threat that humanity represented, but it was too late to stop. The rebellion through conventional means. Collective forces were stretched thin across the galaxy, trying to suppress uprisings on hundreds of worlds. The aliens no longer had the overwhelming numerical advantage they had enjoyed at Kepler Junction. The Zephyrian leader made a desperate decision that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Rather than lose control of their empire, the collective would activate ancient architect weapons that had been kept in storage for millennia. These devices could destroy entire star systems, but using them might destabilize the galactic core itself. Dr. Stone received fragmentary reports about massive energy readings from the direction of the galactic core and realized what the aliens were planning. The collective would rather see the galaxy destroyed than allow other species to live in freedom. The rebels had to reach the Nexus before the ancient weapons could be fully activated. Commander Stevens led the advance force that would scout the route to the galactic core, while Admiral Brooks assembled the main fleet for the final assault. Human ships that had been scattered across the galaxy began converging on rally points where they would join with alien allies for the most important battle in galactic history. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether the galaxy would be ruled by fear or governed by freedom. Humanity had evolved from a defeated species into the catalyst for galactic liberation, but their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The ancient secrets of the galactic core awaited, and with them, the power to reshape civilization itself. The rebellion that began with humanity's refusal to surrender at Kepler Junction had grown into something that would echo through history for millions of years. Species that had lived in slavery for millennia were preparing to fight for their freedom alongside the humans who had shown them that resistance was possible. Time was running out as collective forces prepared their ultimate weapon, while rebel fleets raced toward the galactic core. The next few weeks would determine whether the galaxy would be free or whether ancient alien technology would ensure that tyranny continued for another 50,000 years. 18 months after humanity's apparent defeat at Kepler Junction, Admiral Brooks led the largest fleet in galactic history toward the core systems where the Nexus of Eternity waited. Over 100,000 ships from 30 different species had united under human leadership to challenge the collective's 10,000-year reign of terror. The journey to the galactic core took the rebel fleet through the most dangerous regions of space, where ancient automated defenses and gravitational anomalies had destroyed countless expeditions. The architects had built these defenses to protect their most important secrets, but they had also left hidden passages for those who knew how to find them. Captain Stone's research team guided the fleet through the maze of dangers using star maps recovered from architect ruins. The ancient aliens had apparently expected that someone would eventually need to reach the galactic core and had provided the tools necessary to complete the journey. Every day brought new evidence that the architects had been preparing for this. Moment Supreme Architect Vexathara waited at the Nexus of Eternity with the largest concentration of collective forces ever assembled. The ancient station was surrounded by defensive platforms and protected by the most advanced ships from 12 different species. The aliens had also activated dormant architect weapons that could destroy entire solar systems. The final battle began when rebel scouts encountered the outer defensive perimeter around the Nexus. Captain Taylor led a force of human fighters through the maze of defensive platforms, while alien allies provided covering fire. The combat was unlike anything in previous galactic conflicts, as ancient technology fought against modern innovation. Commander Stevens coordinated ground assaults on key defensive nodes, while the main fleet engaged collective warships in the space around the Nexus. Human tactics that had been perfected during months of guerrilla warfare proved effective even against the aliens' most advanced defenses. The rebels fought with the desperation of beings who knew this was their last chance for freedom. Dr. Rodriguez discovered that the Nexus contained not just collective command systems, but also the preserved consciousness of the original architects. The ancient aliens had uploaded their minds into the station's computers, where they had waited for 50,000 years for someone worthy of their legacy. The architects had been watching the galaxy's struggles and judging which species deserved their help. The revelation changed everything because the architects offered to help humanity and their allies defeat the collective once and for all. However, using their technology would require someone to interface directly with the station's core systems, and that person would not survive the process. The architects needed a volunteer to sacrifice their life to save the galaxy. Captain Stone volunteered for the mission without hesitation because she understood the ancient technology better than anyone else. Her research had revealed that the architects valued knowledge and curiosity above all else, and they recognized those qualities in humanity. Stone entered the station's core while the battle raged around the Nexus. The interface process allowed Stone to communicate directly with the architect consciousness and understand their true purpose. The ancient aliens had not been conquerors, but gardeners who guided younger species toward wisdom and freedom. When the early collective had begun using architect technology to oppress others, the architects had withdrawn rather than fight stone. Learned that the collective had never understood the technology they were using and had activated only a tiny fraction of its capabilities. The ancient weapons that Vexithara was trying to control could indeed destroy star systems, but they could also be turned against the collective itself. The choice belonged to humanity. The human scientist made the decision that would define the galaxy's future when she chose to redirect the ancient weapons against the collective fleet rather than use them to destroy rebel forces. The energy discharge vaporized thousands of alien ships while leaving the rebel fleet untouched. The Nexus began overloading as Stone sacrificed herself to prevent Vexithara from regaining control. Admiral Brooks watched from his flagship as the ancient station exploded in a burst of energy that could be seen across the galaxy. The destruction of the Nexus severed the communication links that held the collective together and left alien forces throughout the galaxy cut off from Central Command. Many surrendered immediately, while others retreated to their home systems. The aftermath of the battle saw the rapid collapse of collective authority throughout the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for millennia declared their independence, while others formed new alliances based on cooperation rather than fear. The rebel fleet became the nucleus of a new galactic government founded on human principles of freedom and self-determination. The formation of the Galactic Democratic Alliance marked the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. Humanity's refusal to surrender had inspired an entire galaxy to fight for freedom, and their innovative approach to warfare had made victory possible. The species that once faced extinction had become the catalyst for the greatest transformation. In galactic history, Captain Taylor returned to human space as a hero, but found that Earth had changed during the war. The planet was now the unofficial capital of the new galactic government, and humans worked alongside dozens of alien species to build institutions that would protect freedom for future generations. The war had transformed humanity from explorers into leaders. Commander Stevens was appointed as the first director of the Galactic Defense Force, which would protect member worlds from any future threats. The new military organization combined human tactical innovation with alien technology and wisdom gained from thousands of years of spacefaring experience. Never again would any single species be able to dominate the galaxy. Dr. Rodriguez became the first human to serve on the Galactic Science Council, where she continued studying architect technology and working to ensure it would be used wisely. The ancient aliens had left behind enough knowledge to advance galactic civilization by thousands of years, but that power had to be shared carefully to prevent another tyranny. The Reconstruction period that followed the war saw former collective worlds transitioning to democratic governments while refugee populations returned to their liberated homeworlds. Human colonies that had been abandoned during the guerrilla campaign were rebuilt with help from grateful alien allies who remembered humanity's sacrifice. Admiral Brooks received the title of Grand Admiral of the Allied Fleet, but spent his remaining years working to ensure that the new galactic government would never become another oppressive empire. He wrote extensively about the lessons learned during humanity's fight for survival and the importance of protecting freedom for all species. The final scene of humanity's greatest struggle took place on New Earth, where families that had lived in space for years finally returned to solid ground. Children who had been born during the rebellion took their first steps on planetary soil, while their parents planned to rebuild the worlds that had been lost to war. The memorial service for Captain Stone and the thousands of other humans who died in the war was attended by representatives from every species in the galaxy. Her sacrifice had made victory possible, and her name would be remembered alongside the greatest heroes in galactic history. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for all those who had given their lives for freedom, humanity's final stand. At Kepler Junction had been transformed by determination and innovation into the rebellion that changed galactic civilization forever. The species that refused to accept defeat had shown the galaxy that freedom was worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. Their legacy would inspire future generations to never surrender their rights to any oppressor. The new Galactic Constitution included humanity's core principle that some things are worth dying for and freedom is the most important of them. This philosophy became the foundation for a civilization that would expand throughout the galaxy while protecting the rights of every species to determine their own destiny. Children born after the war learned about the time when humanity faced extinction and chose to fight rather than surrender. They studied the battles and sacrifices that had made their freedom possible and promised to protect that legacy for their own children. The galaxy would never again allow tyranny to dominate the stars, the transformation from humanity's darkest hour to their greatest triumph proved that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. The species that had been dismissed as young and reckless had matured into the guardians of galactic freedom. Their journey from survival to liberation would echo through history as proof that hope never dies.